The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with the usual mixture of languages, clicks, and harmonics as representatives from 47 different species gathered for the emergency session. Ambassador Zethkar of the Vorthak Empire stood at the central podium, his crystalline form catching the artificial light and casting rainbow patterns across the curved walls. His message had been simple but devastating. The ice world of Kepler 442c was beyond salvation. Esteemed colleagues, Zethkar's voice resonated through the translation matrix, reaching each species in their native tongue. The mining colony on Kepler 442c has gone silent. Our long-range sensors indicate a catastrophic climate shift. The planet's average temperature has dropped to minus 60 degrees Celsius, with some regions reaching minus 100. The atmospheric processors have failed and the thermal generators are offline. Murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates. The Aquarian representatives' tentacles writhed with distress, while the insectoid Kythera clicked their mandibles in what could only be described as resignation. 3,000 colonists from various species had been working the rare mineral deposits on Kepler 442c. Now, they were trapped in what had become a frozen wasteland. The rescue window is closing rapidly. Zethkar continued. Our atmospheric models show the temperature will continue dropping. Within 72 standard hours, even our most cold-resistant species will perish. The polar Dreknari, who can survive in temperatures as low as minus 40 degrees, report that their settlement domes have already become uninhabitable. The Centaurian delegate, her blue-scaled features grim, raised a clawed hand. What of evacuation? Surely our combined fleets can mount a rescue operation. Zethkar's crystalline head dimmed with what his species displayed as sorrow. The planet's electromagnetic storms, intensified by the climate shift, make space-to-surface travel impossible. Our transport vessels cannot penetrate the atmosphere. Even if they could, no known technology can sustain life in such extreme cold for the duration required to establish a proper evacuation protocol. The chamber fell into stunned silence. 3,000 lives lost to the indifferent cruelty of a dying world. The Vorthak had invested heavily in the mining operation, but even their advanced technology had limits. Some forces in the universe were simply too powerful to overcome. From the back of the chamber, a voice spoke up in accented galactic standard. Excuse me, but did you say minus 60 degrees? All eyes turned to the human delegation. Ambassador Sarah Chen stepped forward, her simple environmental suit a stark contrast to the elaborate protective gear worn by other species. The humans were relatively new to the Galactic Council, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years prior. Most species still considered them primitives from a backwater world. Zethkar's translation matrix took a moment to process the interruption. Yes, Ambassador Chen, minus 60 degrees Celsius with projections indicating it will drop further. As I explained, such temperatures are incompatible with life. Sarah exchanged glances with her aide, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Rodriguez, who was trying very hard not to smile. Ambassador Zethkar, with all due respect, I think there might be some confusion about what constitutes incompatible with life. The Centaurian delegate hissed softly. Human, your species evolved in temperate conditions. You cannot possibly understand the severity of this situation. Actually, Sarah said, pulling up her tablet and connecting it to the chamber's display system, I'd like to share some information about Earth's climate diversity. The main screen flickered to life, showing images of vast white landscapes, ice-covered seas, and structures built entirely from frozen water. This is Antarctica, one of Earth's continents. The average temperature is minus 57 degrees Celsius. The lowest recorded temperature was minus 89 degrees. And yet, we maintain permanent research stations there year-round. The images shifted to show humans in heavy coats working outside insulated buildings, operating machinery in howling snowstorms. The chamber erupted in surprised chattering. The insectoid Kythera delegate leaned forward, compound eyes focusing intently on the screen. You maintain colonies in such conditions? For over a century, Marcus added, stepping up beside his ambassador. We also have cities in Siberia, where the winter temperature regularly drops to minus 40 degrees. Some of our northernmost settlements experience minus 50 for months at a time. We call it Tuesday. Zethkar's crystalline form flickered with what might have been disbelief. But your species lacks natural insulation. You have no protective carapace, no thermal regulation organs, no antifreeze proteins in your blood. How do you survive such impossible conditions? Sarah smiled, and there was something predatory in that expression that made several delegates unconsciously step back. We make things. We build tools, we adapt. And when the environment tries to kill us, we take that personally. The display changed again, showing images of massive icebreaker ships cutting through frozen seas, of heated buildings rising like defiant monuments in Arctic landscapes, of humans in insulated suits working calmly in conditions that would instantly kill most other sentient species. You see, Sarah continued, her voice carrying a quiet confidence that filled the chamber. Humans have a saying, it's not the environment that determines survival.
It's the will to survive. We've been fighting hostile climates for our entire evolutionary history.
Ice ages, deserts, mountains, deep ocean trenches, even the vacuum of space. We don't ask permission from the universe to survive somewhere. We just do it. The Aquarian delegate's tentacles had stopped writhing and now hung motionless with shock. You would volunteer for a rescue mission to Kepler 4042c? Volunteer? Sarah laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut through the translation matrix's harmonics. Ambassador, my government has already authorized me to offer immediate assistance. We can have a rescue fleet equipped for extreme, cold weather operations at Kepler 442c within 18 standard hours. The chamber exploded into chaos as delegates began speaking over each other in dozens of languages. Some expressed disbelief, others hope, and a few voiced concerns about human competence. Through it all, Zethkar stood frozen at the podium, his crystalline form processing this impossible development. Finally, he managed to speak. Ambassador Chen, do you truly believe your species can survive in conditions that have proven lethal to our most resilient colonists? Sarah's smile widened. Ambassador Zethkar, my people have been conquering impossible odds since we learned to make fire. The universe keeps trying to kill us, and we keep taking it personally. This won't be the first time we've told physics to go to hell, and it certainly won't be the last. The die was cast. Humanity was about to show the galaxy what it meant to refuse to yield to the impossible. The human rescue fleet materialized from hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, like a collection of predatory sharks smelling blood in the water. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the UES Endurance, watching her tactical display as 6 specialized vessels arranged themselves in perfect formation. Each ship bore the scars of previous impossible missions, their hulls reinforced with titanium steel alloys designed to withstand everything from asteroid impacts to solar flares. Admiral, we're receiving the updated atmospheric readings from the Vorthak monitoring station, reported Commander Lisa Park from the sensor station. The surface temperature has dropped to minus 72 degrees Celsius. Electromagnetic interference is at critical levels. The Vorthak are calling it a death sentence. Elena smiled grimly. She had cut her teeth in the asteroid mining colonies of the outer system, where equipment failure meant freezing to death in minutes. Before that, she had commanded ice-breaking operations in Earth's Arctic Ocean, where the water temperature could kill an unprotected human in under 2 minutes. The Vorthak called this a death sentence. Helena called it a challenging Tuesday. Commander Park patched me through to all ship captains. Let's remind them what humans do best. The communication channel crackled to life, connecting her to 6 of the most experienced cold weather specialists in human space. Captain Zhang Wei of the icebreaker Shackleton, Captain Maria Santos of the heavy transport Aurora, Captain James Mitchell of the engineering vessel Prometheus, Captain Yuki Tanaka of the rescue ship Mercy, Captain David O'Brien of the supply vessel Resolute, and Captain Amara Okafor of the mobile habitat constructor Genesis. Ladies and gentlemen, Elena began, her voice carrying the confidence born of a lifetime spent defying impossible odds. We have 3,000 beings trapped on an ice ball that the rest of the galaxy has written off as uninhabitable. The locals think we're crazy for even attempting this rescue. I think it's time we proved them right. Chuckles echoed through the communication channel. These were people who had volunteered for the most dangerous jobs humanity had to offer. They had built cities in the Martian polar regions, established mining operations in the ice rings of Saturn, and maintained research stations in the frozen methane seas of Titan. A little planetary winter weather was hardly going to stop them. Zhang, what's the status on your ice-cutting equipment? Captain Zhang's voice carried the calm professionalism of someone who had spent decades breaking through kilometer-thick ice sheets. All plasma cutters operational, Admiral. The Shackleton can clear landing zones through any frozen surface these colonists might have encountered. My crew has experience with everything from Earth's Antarctic ice shelf to the frozen nitrogen deposits on Pluto's surface. Santos, cargo status. Aurora is loaded with enough prefabricated emergency shelters to house 5,000 beings, Captain Santos reported. Thermal generators rated for -100 degrees, enough food and water for 6 months, and medical supplies designed for extreme cold exposure. We also have 300 environmental suits rated for vacuum operations, which should handle anything this planet can throw at us. Elena nodded, checking her tactical display as the fleet began its approach to the hostile world below. The electromagnetic storms were intensifying, creating a light show that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Now they represented just another obstacle to overcome. Mitchell, are you ready to perform miracles with broken infrastructure? Captain Mitchell's laugh carried the confidence of someone who had rebuilt failed atmospheric processors on a dozen different worlds. Admiral, my engineering teams have restored life support systems in the middle of solar flares and rebuilt mining equipment after direct asteroid impacts. Whatever knocked out their thermal generators, we can fix it. My crew has experience with Vorthak technology from our joint operations in the Centauri system. The Prometheus had been specifically equipped for this mission with spare parts, compatible with 17 different alien technologies. Human engineering philosophy had always been simple. If it could break, carry the parts to fix it. If it couldn't break, carry the parts anyway because the universe had a sense of humor. Tanaka, medical readiness. Mercy is equipped with treatment protocols for 47 different species. Captain Tanaka responded. We have hypothermia treatment capabilities that exceed galactic medical standards by significant margins. My medical teams have experience treating cold-related injuries in environments that most species consider uninhabitable. We're ready for anything from mild exposure to complete thermal shutdown. Elena felt a familiar surge of pride in her species. While other races had evolved specialized organs for specific environments, humans had evolved something far more dangerous: the ability to analyze any environment and create the tools needed to not just survive, but thrive. O'Brien, supply status. Resolute is carrying enough consumables to sustain this operation for 4 months if necessary, Captain O'Brien reported. We have backup supplies for every piece of critical equipment, plus 3 different types of emergency rations designed for extreme cold weather operations. My crew has managed supply lines in environments ranging from the deep ocean thermal vents to the frozen surface of Europa. Finally, Elena turned to the most ambitious part of their mission. Okafor, are you ready to build a city in hell? Captain Amara Okafor's voice carried the quiet satisfaction of someone who had built impossible things in impossible places. Genesis is equipped with modular construction systems capable of creating a permanent settlement rated for -100 degrees Celsius. We can establish a fully functional base of operations within 12 hours of touchdown. My construction teams have built cities on worlds that the galactic community declared uninhabitable. This won't be our first time telling the universe to reconsider its definitions. As the fleet entered the planet's upper atmosphere, the electromagnetic interference intensified dramatically. Lightning arced between the ship's shields, and the communication system struggled to maintain contact through the chaotic energy discharges. The temperature readings continued to plummet, reaching levels that would instantly kill most known life forms. Through it all, the human crews worked with the calm efficiency of people who had trained for exactly this scenario. Emergency protocols developed over centuries of surviving in hostile environments kicked into operation. Backup systems activated seamlessly as primary systems strained under the electromagnetic assault. Admiral, Commander Park called out, her voice tight with concentration. We're receiving a weak signal from the surface. It's one of the Vorthak emergency beacons, but the signal is badly distorted. Elena studied the readouts, noting the position coordinates and the weakening power signature. The colonists were running out of time, but they were still alive, still fighting, still hoping for rescue from the impossible cold that was slowly claiming their world. All ships, this is Admiral Vasquez. We have confirmation that there are survivors on the surface. Begin final approach to designated landing zones. Remember, people, the galaxy is watching. Let's show them what happens when humans decide that impossible is just another word for Tuesday. The rescue fleet descended through the howling electromagnetic storm, their hulls glowing with friction heat that would soon be forgotten in the bitter cold below. Behind them, the Galactic Council's monitoring ships watched in fascination and growing disbelief as humanity prepared to attempt the impossible once again. The UES Shackleton touched down on the frozen surface of Kepler 442c with the grace of a falling hammer, its reinforced landing gear punching through 3 meters of ice before finding solid ground. Captain Zhang Wei felt the familiar vibration through the ship's hull as the plasma cutters engaged automatically, melting landing zones for the rest of the fleet through ice so thick it could have been mistaken for bedrock. Touchdown confirmed, Zhang reported to the fleet. Surface temperature holding steady at -74 degrees Celsius. Wind speed 40 meters per second with gusts up to 70. Visibility near zero due to ice storm conditions. He paused, checking his instruments with the calm professionalism of someone who had landed ships in worse conditions. Just another day at the office. Through the bridge viewports, the crew could see nothing but a howling white chaos that would have been beautiful if it weren't trying to kill everything it touched. The electromagnetic interference was so intense that it created visible arcs of energy dancing across the ice, turning the landing zone into a display of deadly fireworks. Senior Chief Petty Officer Maria Gonzalez emerged from the equipment bay wearing a full environmental suit that looked like a cross between medieval armor and a spacesuit. The heating elements built into the suit glowed softly, creating a personal microclimate that could keep a human comfortable in the vacuum of space. Behind her, the landing team moved with the efficient choreography of people who had performed similar operations in equally hostile environments. Ice cutting team ready for deployment, Gonzalez reported. Thermal lance operators standing by to clear paths to the colonial settlement. All personnel equipped with emergency beacons and enough power for 72 hours of continuous operation. Zhang nodded, watching his tactical display as the other ships began their final approach. The Aurora was coming in heavy, loaded with enough supplies to sustain a small city. The Prometheus descended like a mechanical angel of mercy, its engineering bays packed with equipment to restore any conceivable type of life support system. The Mercy followed close behind, its medical facilities ready to treat conditions that most species didn't even have names for. Gonzalez, you're cleared for surface operations. Remember, we're not just rescuing these colonists. We're making a statement to the entire galaxy about what humans consider impossible. The airlock cycled, and the first human beings stepped onto the surface of a world that the galactic community had declared unsurvivable. The wind hit them with the force of a physical blow, driving ice crystals hard enough to leave scratches on their reinforced visors. The cold was so intense that it seemed to have weight, pressing down on them like the hand of an indifferent god. Maria Gonzalez had grown up in northern Alaska, where winter temperatures regularly dropped to -40 degrees, and the aurora borealis painted the sky with impossible colors. She had trained in Antarctica, where the wind could strip flesh from bone and the cold could freeze exposed skin in seconds. This was colder, more hostile, and completely alien. But it was still just weather. Thermal Lance Team, begin clearing operations, she commanded, her voice carrying clearly through the communication system despite the howling wind. Navigation Team, establish route markers to the colonial settlement. Search Team, begin sweep pattern for any survivors who might have been caught outside when the climate shift occurred. The thermal lances ignited with blue-white fury, their plasma streams cutting through the ice like lightsabers through paper. The steam created by the melting ice froze almost instantly in the bitter air, creating clouds of crystalline vapor that sparkled in the lancelight. Slowly, methodically, the human teams began carving a path through the frozen wasteland toward the coordinates of the main colonial settlement. 3 kilometers away, in the emergency shelter that had once been the colony's main administration building, Fourth-Tech engineer Kesthal watched his power readings drop toward critical levels. The emergency heating system was failing, and the temperature inside the shelter was already approaching -20 degrees Celsius. Around him, colonists from 7 different species huddled together for warmth, their biological heat the only thing standing between them and death. "The humans have actually landed," whispered Zefkan, a Centaurian mining specialist whose blue scales had turned almost white with cold. "The sensor readings show 6 ships on the surface. They're operating in conditions that should have killed them within minutes." Kesathal's crystalline head flickered with weak bioluminescence, the closest his species could come to expressing disbelief. The humans were supposed to be primitives, barely advanced enough for space travel. Their homeworld was a temperate paradise compared to the gas giant systems or the crystalline caves where most species had evolved. How could they possibly survive in conditions that were killing species specifically adapted for cold climates? Through the shelter's reinforced windows, they could see lights moving in the distance. Not the cold, steady glow of artificial illumination, but the brilliant fury of plasma cutters working against the ice. The lights were getting closer, carving a path through the frozen landscape with mechanical determination. Emergency power at 15%, reported Lithara, the Aquarian colony coordinator, her tentacles trembling with more than just cold. Life support will fail completely within 2 hours. As if summoned by her words, a new sound penetrated the howling wind outside. Not the random chaos of the ice storm, but the rhythmic pounding of something large and mechanical moving across the frozen ground. The colonists pressed against the windows, trying to see through the swirling ice crystals. A massive shape loomed out of the blizzard like a mechanical leviathan. The UES Aurora had deployed its ground mobility systems, transforming from a landed spacecraft into a mobile base of operations. Its heated tracks melted the ice beneath it as it advanced, leaving behind a trail of steaming slush that refroze almost immediately. Searchlights pierced the darkness, turning the ice storm into a glittering cathedral of moving light. The vehicle stopped directly outside the emergency shelter, its bulk blocking the wind and creating a pocket of relative calm. External speakers crackled to life, and a human voice spoke in fluent galactic standard with just a hint of what might have been amusement. "This is Captain Maria Santos of the UES Aurora. We're here to get you out of this weather. Please stand back from the main entrance. We're about to make this facility significantly more comfortable." The colonists watched in amazement as human figures emerged from the mobile base, moving with casual confidence across ice that should have been immediately lethal. They were carrying equipment that steamed in the bitter air, devices that none of the colonists recognized but which radiated heat like tiny suns. Within minutes, the humans had attached their equipment to the shelter's failing power systems. The emergency heating kicked back to full power, and the interior temperature began climbing toward livable levels. More importantly, the humans were setting up what appeared to be a permanent heat distribution system that could maintain comfortable temperatures indefinitely. "Ladies, gentlemen, and esteemed beings," Captain Santos announced as she entered the shelter, her environmental suit making her look like a visitor from a more advanced civilization. "I'm Captain Santos, commanding officer of the relief operation. We're going to get you off this ice ball and somewhere warm. But first, we're going to make this place livable while we work." She pulled off her helmet, revealing a face that was completely calm despite having just walked through conditions that should have been instantly fatal. Her breath didn't even mist in the air that had been killing the colonists just minutes before. "How?" Kesthal managed to ask, his translation matrix struggling with concepts that had no equivalent in his language. "How do you survive in such impossible conditions?" Santos smiled, and there was something in that expression that spoke of a species that had been fighting hostile environments for so long that they had forgotten it was supposed to be impossible. "Engineer Kesethal, my people have a saying. There's no such thing as bad weather, only inappropriate equipment. We brought the right equipment. Outside, the human rescue operation was just getting started." Dr. Emily Chen stepped through the airlock of the UES Mercy into what could only be described as controlled chaos. The medical bay buzzed with activity as her team worked to treat hypothermia cases that would have challenged the finest medical facilities in the galaxy. What made it remarkable wasn't the severity of the conditions they were treating, but the casual efficiency with which they worked. "Patient intake report," called out Nurse Commander Jack Thompson, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had treated everything from decompression injuries to radiation poisoning. 47 beings suffering from severe hypothermia, 12 cases of frostbite, and 6 cases of complete thermal shutdown that would normally be considered fatal. Dr. Chen nodded, reviewing the patient files on her tablet while simultaneously monitoring the treatment of a Centaurian, whose blue scales had turned almost black with cold. The being's body temperature had dropped so low that most galactic medical protocols would have declared them dead. But human medicine had different standards when it came to cold-related injuries. "Initiate gradual rewarming protocol for all hypothermia cases," she ordered, her hands moving with practiced precision as she adjusted the treatment settings. "Core temperature restoration at 2 degrees per hour maximum. No faster or we risk thermal shock. Thompson, What's the status on the Vorthak crystalline matrix reconstruction? Fascinating case, Thompson replied, working over a patient whose crystalline body had actually begun to fracture from the extreme cold. Their biological matrix appears to be silicon-based rather than carbon-based, but the principles of cold injury remain surprisingly similar. We're using modified protocols developed for treating semiconductor crystal damage in cryogenic manufacturing. Dr. Chen smiled grimly. Human medicine had always been pragmatic rather than elegant. When you evolved on a world where the environment was constantly trying to kill you, you learned to adapt medical techniques to whatever worked. It didn't matter if you were treating a human suffering from hypothermia in Antarctic conditions or an alien whose physiology was based on living crystal. The underlying principles remained the same. Restore normal function gradually and prevent secondary damage from the treatment itself. Across the medical bay, Dr. Sarah Kim worked on the most challenging case of the day, a polar drachnari whose cold-adapted physiology had actually made them more vulnerable to the extreme conditions on Kepler 442c. The beings were naturally resistant to temperatures down to -40 degrees Celsius, but the planet's -74-degree environment had overwhelmed their biological defenses. This is counterintuitive, Dr. Kim muttered, studying the patient's vital signs. Their cold adaptation made them overconfident about their limits. They didn't take proper precautions when the temperature started dropping because they thought their natural resistance would protect them. Classic case of evolutionary overspecialization, Dr. Chen observed, moving to assist with the treatment. Their species adapted to specific cold conditions, so they can't handle extremes outside their evolutionary niche. Humans never had that luxury. We had to develop behavioral and technological adaptations instead of biological ones. The polar drachnari patient stirred slightly as the warming treatment began to take effect. Their reptilian features, normally a pale blue color, had turned almost white with cold. Through the translation matrix, a weak voice asked, "How do you survive what we cannot?" "We are the cold-adapted ones." Dr. Chen checked the patient's core temperature as she formulated her response. "Your species adapted to survive in cold conditions. My species adapted to survive in any conditions. There's a difference between being naturally resistant to cold and being willing to tell the cold to go to hell." Through the medical bay's viewports, they could see the ongoing rescue operation outside. Human teams moved across the frozen landscape, with the steady determination of people who had been doing impossible things for so long that they had forgotten it was supposed to be impossible. Thermal cutting equipment carved pathways through the ice while construction teams erected temporary shelters that could maintain comfortable temperatures in the middle of an ice storm. "Dr. Chen, we're receiving a priority communication from the surface teams," announced Lieutenant Rebecca Walsh from the communications station. "They've located the main mining facility, but the situation is more complex than initially reported." Dr. Chen activated the communication channel while continuing to monitor her patient's vital signs. "This is Dr. Chen. What's the situation?" Captain James Mitchell's voice crackled through the electromagnetic interference, his tone carrying the controlled frustration of an engineer facing an impossible problem. "Doc, we've found the miners, but they're trapped inside a collapsed section of the facility. The ice buildup caused structural failure, and now they're sealed in a chamber that's rapidly losing power and heat." "How many?" 43 beings from 6 different species. They have maybe 4 hours of emergency power left, and the chamber temperature is dropping fast. The structural damage makes it too dangerous to use standard cutting equipment without risking further collapse." Dr. Chen exchanged glances with her medical team. 43 more critical patients, all suffering from progressive hypothermia in a chamber that was becoming colder by the minute. Standard rescue techniques would take too long, and the unstable structure made conventional approaches impossible. "What's the plan?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "We're going to do what humans do best," Captain Mitchell replied, and she could hear the grin in his voice despite the desperate situation. "We're going to accomplish the impossible through the application of excessive engineering and complete disregard for common sense." Outside the medical bay, the human rescue teams were already implementing a plan that would have been rejected as impossible by any reasonable engineering analysis. Instead of trying to cut through the collapsed structure, they were going to go under it. The plan involved using plasma cutters to melt a tunnel through the permafrost beneath the facility, creating an access route that bypassed the unstable surface structure entirely. You're going to tunnel through frozen ground using shipboard equipment? Dr. Chen asked, her voice carrying a mixture of admiration and concern. In sub-zero temperatures with electromagnetic interference that's playing havoc with your sensors? Doc, last year my crew tunneled through the ice shell of Europa to reach a research station that had been buried under a glacier. The year before that, we dug emergency shelters in the surface of Titan using equipment designed for asteroid mining. This is just Tuesday with better weather. Dr. Chen shook her head, marveling once again at her species' casual attitude toward the impossible. While other races developed elaborate philosophical frameworks for accepting the limitations of their environment, humans simply refused to acknowledge that limitations existed. How long until you reach them? 6 hours if everything goes according to plan, 4 hours if we push the equipment past safe operational parameters. And which approach are you taking? Doc, we're humans. We don't know what safe operational parameters are. We'll have them out in 3 hours. As the communication channel closed, Dr. Chen turned back to her patients with renewed determination. The human rescue teams were racing against time and physics to reach the trapped miners, which meant her medical team needed to be ready to receive 43 more critical patients who would likely be in the advanced stages of hypothermia. Thompson, prepare the emergency rewarming systems for mass casualties. Kim, set up the secondary treatment bay for additional hypothermia cases. Walsh, coordinate with the supply teams to ensure we have enough warming blankets and IV fluids for a full-scale medical emergency. Around her, the medical team moved with the practiced efficiency of professionals who had trained for exactly this type of impossible situation. They were about to attempt a mass casualty medical operation in conditions that most species would consider unsurvivable, using techniques developed for treating cold injuries that most galactic medical science considered invariably fatal. Just another day in the life of human medicine, where impossible was simply the starting point for getting creative. 3 meters beneath the frozen surface of Kepler 442c, Chief Engineer Rodriguez worked in conditions that would have challenged the most advanced mining equipment in the galaxy. The plasma cutter in his hands burned with the intensity of a small star, melting through permafrost so hard it had the consistency of reinforced concrete. Around him, his engineering team worked with the methodical precision of people who had spent their careers making the impossible routine. Tunnel progress at 60%. Rodriguez reported through the communication system, his voice steady despite working in a confined space where the walls were literally trying to freeze him solid. Soil composition is proving more challenging than anticipated. This isn't just frozen dirt, it's frozen dirt mixed with metallic compounds from the mining operations. Basically, we're cutting through nature's own version of reinforced concrete. Above them, Admiral Vasquez monitored the operation from the mobile command center that Captain Okafor's team had erected in record time. The structure was a marvel of human engineering, a fully functional base of operations that maintained comfortable temperatures while withstanding winds that could strip the paint off a starship hull. Chief, how are your power levels holding up? The Admiral asked, watching the energy consumption readings with concern. The plasma cutters were drawing enormous amounts of power, and the electromagnetic interference was playing havoc with their energy distribution systems. We're running the cutters at 110% of rated capacity, Rodriguez replied, pausing to wipe condensation from his visor. Even with the heating systems running at maximum, the extreme cold was causing moisture to freeze on every exposed surface. The equipment is holding up better than expected, but we're definitely pushing it into uncharted territory. Behind him, Specialist Lisa Park monitored the structural integrity of the tunnel, with instruments that had been designed for asteroid mining operations. Chief, the tunnel walls are showing signs of stress fracturing from the thermal differential. The rapid heating from the plasma cutters is causing expansion stress in the frozen soil. Rodriguez nodded grimly. They were racing against time and physics simultaneously. The tunnel needed to be completed quickly enough to save the trapped miners, but moving too fast could cause a catastrophic collapse that would kill everyone involved. It was the kind of engineering challenge that most species would solve through careful analysis and conservative safety margins. Humans, characteristically, had chosen to solve it through excessive application of technology and calculated recklessness. Park, deploy the structural stabilization foam behind us as we advance. We'll reinforce the tunnel as we go. Rodriguez adjusted his cutting angle, sending a stream of superheated plasma through the frozen earth with surgical precision. If the tunnel wants to collapse, it's going to have to get in line behind all the other impossible things we've accomplished this week. 6 meters ahead of their current position, the trapped miners huddled in their collapsing chamber, listening to the sound of human engineering slowly approaching through the frozen ground. The rhythmic noise of the plasma cutters had become their lifeline, a mechanical heartbeat that promised rescue from the impossible cold that was slowly claiming their world. Kithara mining specialist, Chatak clicked his mandibles nervously as he monitored the chamber's failing life support systems. His insectoid physiology was naturally resistant to many environmental extremes, but even his species had limits. The chamber temperature had dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius, and their emergency heating system was operating on backup power that would last perhaps 2 more hours. "The humans are actually coming," whispered Zethdal, a young Vorthak engineer, whose crystalline body was already showing stress fractures from the cold. "I can hear their equipment cutting through the permafrost. They're going to tunnel directly underneath the collapsed structure." "Impossible," replied Lithos, the senior Aquarian geologist whose tentacles had long since stopped their normal rhythmic movements. "No species attempts rescue operations in such conditions. The risk to the rescuers exceeds any reasonable assessment of mission success probability." Chatak's compound eyes reflected the dim emergency lighting as he considered this observation. The Aquarian was correct by any logical analysis. The humans were risking their lives to save beings from species they barely knew, in conditions that should have killed the rescuers before they could even begin their mission. It violated every principle of survival logic that governed galactic civilization, which he was beginning to realize was exactly the point. Above them, the sound of cutting equipment grew steadily closer. The humans weren't just attempting a rescue. They were succeeding at a rescue that the combined wisdom of 47 galactic species had declared impossible. They were doing it with casual efficiency that suggested this was merely another routine operation for them. In the tunnel below, Rodriguez felt his plasma cutter break through into empty space and knew they had reached their destination. "Breakthrough achieved," he announced, allowing himself a moment of satisfaction. "We have visual contact with the trapped chamber. Beginning entrance preparation." The hole he had cut was barely large enough for a human to pass through, but it represented a triumph of engineering over physics that would be studied by galactic universities for decades to come. Through that narrow opening, superheated air from the tunnel mixed with the freezing atmosphere of the chamber, creating a fog of steam that looked almost magical in the emergency lighting. "Miners, this is Chief Rodriguez of the Human Rescue Team," he called through the opening, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "We're going to get you out of here, but we need to move quickly. The tunnel is stable but temporary. We'll be bringing you out one at a time through the access tunnel." The first to emerge was Chatak, whose insectoid physiology allowed him to squeeze through the narrow opening with relative ease. As he dropped into the tunnel, he found himself face to face with beings whose species had just accomplished something that every expert in the galaxy had declared impossible. "How?" he managed to ask in his clicking language, which the human translation systems rendered into galactic standard with mechanical precision. Rodriguez grinned, his face showing the satisfaction of someone who had just told the universe to reconsider its definitions. "My friend, we're humans. We specialize in taking impossible problems and making them routine engineering challenges." One by one, the trapped miners were extracted through the tunnel that shouldn't have existed, brought to safety by beings who shouldn't have been able to survive in such conditions. Each rescue was a small victory against the indifferent hostility of a universe that seemed determined to prove that some things were beyond the reach of any technology. As the last miner emerged into the tunnel, Rodriguez allowed himself a moment to appreciate the magnitude of what they had accomplished. They had successfully completed a rescue operation that required tunneling through frozen ground harder than steel, in temperatures that would instantly kill most known life forms, using equipment pushed far beyond its designed operational limits. "All miners extracted successfully," he reported to Admiral Vasquez. "Beginning tunnel evacuation. The chamber is now completely compromised, but everyone is safe. Above ground." Admiral Vasquez nodded with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had just watched her species accomplish the impossible once again. Around her, the human rescue teams continued their operations with the steady competence that had become humanity's signature throughout the galaxy. "Outstanding work," Chief, bring everyone home. As the rescue teams began their extraction from the tunnel, the Galactic Council monitoring ships registered another impossible data point in their growing file on human capabilities. The species that shouldn't have been able to survive on the planet's surface had just completed a rescue operation that violated several fundamental principles of physics and engineering. It was becoming clear that humans had a very different relationship with the concept of impossible than the rest of the galaxy. Captain Amara Okafor stood in the center of what had been an impossible frozen wasteland 18 hours earlier and was now a thriving temporary city. The modular construction systems of the UES Genesis had transformed the landscape with a speed that defied conventional engineering wisdom, erecting heated shelters, power distribution networks, and life support systems that could maintain comfortable living conditions in the middle of an ice storm that would have killed exposed organic life in minutes. Final evacuation status report, she requested from her command station, watching the displays that showed every aspect of the massive rescue operation in real time. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Park looked up from her coordination terminal, her expression showing the controlled exhaustion of someone who had just orchestrated one of the most complex rescue operations in galactic history. 2,947 beings successfully extracted from emergency conditions and transferred to climate-controlled facilities. All critical hypothermia cases have been stabilized and are responding to treatment. The temporary settlement can maintain full life support for up to 6 months if necessary. Okafor nodded, feeling a deep sense of professional satisfaction. The mission had required every bit of engineering expertise her teams possessed, plus several innovations that would probably revolutionize cold weather construction techniques throughout human space. They had built a fully functional city in conditions that most species considered unsurvivable, using techniques developed on the fly to meet challenges that had never been encountered before. What's the status on the permanent infrastructure restoration? Captain Mitchell's engineering teams have successfully repaired the main atmospheric processors, Park reported. The planetary heating grid should be back online within 12 hours. Local weather patterns indicate the ice storm will begin subsiding once the thermal regulation systems reach full operation. Through the command center's reinforced windows, they could see the rescued colonists moving between the heated shelters with a mixture of relief and amazement. Beings from 7 different species, many of whom had never encountered humans before this crisis, were experiencing firsthand what it meant when humanity decided that physics was more like a set of suggestions than actual laws. In Medical Shelter 7, Vorthak engineer Kesthal sat on a human-designed chair that had been modified for his crystalline physiology, listening to Dr. Emily Chen explain the treatment protocols that had saved his life. His natural bioluminescence had returned to normal levels, and the stress fractures in his crystalline matrix were healing with the aid of human medical technology. Your species' approach to impossible conditions is unlike anything in our galactic databases, he observed, his translation matrix rendering his harmonic speech into curious wonderment. Most civilizations develop philosophical frameworks for accepting environmental limitations. Humans appear to have developed philosophical frameworks for rejecting environmental limitations. Dr. Chen smiled as she checked his recovery readings. Engineer Kesethal, my species has a fundamental problem with the concept of accepting limitations. When the environment tells us we can't survive somewhere, we take it as a personal challenge. When physics tells us something is impossible, we assume physics just needs better engineering. Across the temporary city, similar conversations were taking place as the rescued colonists tried to understand how a species they had dismissed as primitives had accomplished something that the combined expertise of the galactic community had declared impossible. In Engineering Shelter 3, Chaitak the Cathera mining specialist watched human technicians work on equipment that had been damaged beyond what his species' repair protocols could handle. The humans were using techniques that seemed to violate several fundamental principles of mechanical engineering, yet somehow produced functional results. How do you repair systems that are damaged beyond specifications? He asked Chief Rodriguez, who was directing the restoration of a mining extractor that had been crushed by falling ice. Easy, Rodriguez replied, his hands moving with practiced precision as he reconfigured the damaged components. We don't repair them beyond specifications. We rebuild them to better specifications. If the original design couldn't handle the conditions it encountered, we improved the design. Chitak watched in fascination as the human engineering team essentially redesigned the mining equipment in real time, incorporating modifications that made it more robust, more efficient, and more resistant to extreme conditions. It wasn't just repair work. It was evolutionary improvement applied to mechanical systems. Your species approaches technology as if it were a living organism, he observed. Rodriguez paused in his work to consider this observation. Maybe that's because we approach survival the same way. Our technology evolves because we evolve. When we encounter new challenges, we don't just adapt ourselves, we adapt our tools. Then we adapt our tools. Then we adapt the principles underlying our tools. In the temporary command center, Admiral Vasquez received an incoming communication from the Galactic Council monitoring station. Ambassador Zethkar's crystalline form appeared on the display, his harmonic voice carrying a mixture of gratitude and complete bewilderment. Admiral Vasquez, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I must express our deepest appreciation for your species' intervention in this crisis. However, I must also confess that our understanding of human capabilities requires significant revision. Admiral Vasquez allowed herself a slight smile. Ambassador, I'm curious about what specifically has surprised the Council. Admiral, our original assessment indicated that Kepler 442c had become unsurvivable for any known form of life. Your species not only survived on the surface, but established a temporary civilization that appears to be more advanced than the original colonial infrastructure. You accomplished in 18 hours what our combined engineering expertise estimated would require 6 months. Assuming it were possible at all. Ambassador, there's something you need to understand about humans. We don't really recognize the difference between difficult and impossible. From our perspective, impossible just means we haven't figured out the right approach yet. Zethkar's crystalline form flickered with what his species displayed as deep contemplation. Admiral, if you don't mind me asking, what would your species consider truly impossible? Admiral Vasquez considered the question carefully. Around her, she could see the evidence of human capability. A thriving, temporary city built in conditions that should have killed everyone involved. Rescued colonists who had been declared beyond salvation, and engineering achievements that redefined what was considered possible in extreme environments. Ambassador, we're still working on that, she replied finally. Every time we think we've found something that's truly impossible, someone in our species takes it as a personal challenge. We've been doing it for so long that we've basically forgotten how to quit. Through the observation windows of the Galactic Council monitoring station, the alien observers watched the impossible city that humans had built on the frozen surface of a dead world. The structures glowed warmly in the bitter cold, creating pools of light and life in a landscape that had been declared unsurvivable by every expert analysis. It was becoming clear that the galaxy's understanding of human capabilities needed fundamental revision. The species that lived on a single temperate world had just demonstrated cold weather survival capabilities that exceeded those of races specifically adapted for such environments. More disturbing, from the Council's perspective, was the casual efficiency with which humans had accomplished the impossible. This hadn't been a desperate last-ditch effort that pushed their capabilities to the absolute limit. This had been a routine rescue operation, executed with the calm professionalism of people who did impossible things so regularly that they had developed standard operating procedures for it. Admiral, Ambassador Zethkar said finally, I believe the Galactic Council will need to significantly revise our assessment protocols for determining planetary habitability. If humans can establish permanent settlements in conditions we consider unsurvivable, perhaps our definitions of habitable are too conservative. Admiral Vasquez's smile widened. Ambassador, that's exactly the kind of thinking that's going to serve the galaxy well. From humanity's perspective, the universe is a lot more habitable than most species assume. You just have to be willing to argue with physics until you reach a compromise. As the communication ended, the impossible city continued its operations in the impossible cold of a world that had been written off as dead, a testament to what happened when humans decided that the universe's limitations were merely starting points for negotiation. 6 months later, Ambassador Sarah Chen stood before the Galactic Council in the same chamber where the crisis had begun. But the atmosphere was completely different. The emergency session had been replaced by a formal presentation that would fundamentally alter how the galaxy approached the concepts of planetary Habitability and species capabilities. The main display showed real-time images from Kepler 442c, where what had been an emergency rescue operation had evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history. The planet's surface was no longer a frozen wasteland marked by the scars of a failed colony. Instead, it showed a thriving settlement that had not only survived the extreme conditions, but had turned them into an advantage. "Esteemed colleagues," Sarah began, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had become humanity's trademark throughout the galaxy, "I'm pleased to report that the Kepler 442c settlement has not only achieved full self-sufficiency, but has become the most productive mining operation in this sector of space." The assembled delegates murmured among themselves in dozens of languages as the display showed images of sophisticated industrial facilities, operating efficiently in conditions that many species still considered unsurvivable. The human-designed infrastructure had transformed the hostile environment into a competitive advantage, using the extreme cold for industrial processes that required ultra-low temperatures. Ambassador Zethkar rose from his position, his crystalline form reflecting the chamber lights with what his species displayed as profound curiosity. "Ambassador Chen, our monitoring stations indicate that your species has established permanent settlements in regions where the average temperature remains below -50 degrees Celsius. How is this possible?" Sarah smiled, remembering the conversation 6 months earlier when the same question had been asked about survival. "Not thriving, Ambassador. It turns out that extreme cold is incredibly useful for certain types of manufacturing and processing. The colonists discovered that they could produce crystalline matrices with unprecedented purity levels using the natural low-temperature environment. What started as a survival challenge became an economic opportunity." The display shifted to show detailed technical specifications that made several delegates lean forward with interest. The human settlements weren't just surviving in impossible conditions. They were using those conditions to achieve results that temperate world manufacturing couldn't match. "The ultra-pure crystalline matrices produced at Kepler 442c have revolutionized our electronics manufacturing," Sarah continued. "The natural low temperatures allow for molecular-level precision that requires enormous energy expenditures to achieve artificially. We're producing components that are 30% more efficient than anything previously manufactured." From the back of the chamber, the Centaurian delegate raised a clawed hand. "Ambassador Chen, are you suggesting that your species intentionally seeks out hostile environments for industrial purposes?" "Not exactly," Sarah replied, pulling up a galactic map that showed human settlements scattered across worlds that most species had classified as uninhabitable. "We seek out challenging environments because they force us to develop better solutions. Those better solutions often turn out to have applications we never anticipated." The map showed human outposts on worlds ranging from ice planets, where the atmosphere froze solid during winter, to volcanic worlds where the surface was regularly reshaped by tectonic activity, to high-radiation environments that would sterilize most organic life. Each settlement was not just surviving, but contributing to human civilization in ways that would have been impossible in more benign environments. "Take our settlement on Proxima 7, Sarah said, highlighting a world where the radiation levels were considered lethal by galactic standards. "The hostile radiation environment forced us to develop new shielding technologies that turned out to be perfect for improving starship design. Our vessels now have radiation protection that exceeds galactic standards by orders of magnitude." Chatak, the Kithara mining specialist who had been rescued from Kepler 442c, clicked his mandibles in what his species displayed as amazement. He had spent the past 6 months working alongside human engineers and had witnessed firsthand their approach to impossible challenges. "Honored delegates," he said, rising from his position, "I have observed human engineering capabilities directly. Their species doesn't simply adapt to hostile environments. They develop technologies that transform hostile environments into advantageous ones. What they accomplished on Kepler 442c wasn't just rescue and survival, it was environmental conversion." The chamber erupted in surprised discussion as the implications of this statement sank in. The humans weren't just hardy survivors who could endure hostile conditions. They were a species that could take worlds that other races considered uninhabitable and transform them into productive assets. The galactic classification system for planetary habitability, Sarah continued over the discussion, assumes that habitable means naturally comfortable for existing life forms. Human classification systems are based on the assumption that any environment can be made comfortable for life with sufficient application of technology and determination. She paused, letting that statement sink in before continuing. From humanity's perspective, there are no uninhabitable worlds. There are only worlds that haven't been properly developed yet. Ambassador Zethkar's crystalline form flickered with what his species displayed as profound realization. Ambassador Chen, are you suggesting that the galaxy contains significantly more habitable real estate than our current surveys indicate? Ambassador, I'm suggesting that the galaxy contains exponentially more habitable real estate than current surveys indicate. Every world that's been classified as uninhabitable due to extreme temperatures, radiation, atmospheric composition, or geological instability is potentially a valuable resource waiting for the right development approach. The implications were staggering. The galactic community had spent millennia cataloging worlds as habitable or uninhabitable based on whether they could naturally support known life forms. The human perspective suggested that virtually any world could be made to support life and industrial activity with sufficient engineering investment. There's something else you should know, Sarah added, calling up a new display that showed construction activities throughout human space. We've begun sharing our environmental adaptation technologies with other species. The Vorthak have successfully established a colony on a world they previously considered too cold for their crystalline biology. The Aquarians are developing underwater cities in environments they thought were too extreme for their species. The chamber fell into stunned silence as delegates processed this information. The humans weren't just expanding their own settlement capabilities. They were teaching other species to exceed their own perceived limitations. The rescue of Kepler 442c wasn't just about saving those specific colonists, Sarah concluded. It was about demonstrating that the universe is a much more hospitable place than most of us assumed. The only real limitation is our willingness to develop solutions for challenging conditions. As the formal session ended, delegates clustered in small groups discussing the profound implications of humanity's casual redefinition of what was considered possible. The species that had arrived at galactic civilization from a single temperate world had just demonstrated that their perspective on habitability was fundamentally different from everyone else's. In the months that followed, applications for joint human-alien colonization projects increased by several thousand% as species began to reconsider worlds they had previously written off as uninhabitable. The galactic real estate market experienced unprecedented expansion as worlds that had been considered worthless became valuable development opportunities. And throughout it all, humans continued their characteristic approach to the impossible. They took it personally, developed solutions that violated several principles of common sense, and then made those solutions routine enough to teach to other species. The galaxy was discovering that when humans encountered something that couldn't be done, they didn't accept the limitation. They negotiated with it until they reached a more favorable arrangement. The universe, for its part, was learning that arguing with humans was a losing proposition. They had been doing impossible things for so long that they had forgotten it was supposed to be difficult. As Ambassador Chen had predicted, humanity's relationship with the impossible had become the galaxy's most valuable resource, and they were just getting started.